Hold on. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. We are now in our 12th hour, I think, something like that. And one of the most difficult topics will be covered this hour. I want to thank, we got viewers all over the world logged in at longestshir.com. This is the biggest Torah, it's not like Donald Trump, this is the biggest Torah of, no, I don't know who's watching, but we have some people overseas who are watching, and I want to thank Alex and Rachel Katz for their support. I want to thank their children for doing this over in Israel. You were with us from the beginning. I want to thank Isaac, Ezra, Daphne, and Ayla. We love that you're with us in Israel. It makes us feel like we're there with you in the Holy Land, gives us chizuk to make the entire 18 hours. The adrenaline's pumping at this point. We could see the end in sight. Doing this ultimately, lahagdil Torah v'yadir, to make Torah great and glorious. Torah is an amazing thing. When you really get into it, I could feel I could do this for another 15 hours because you get excited by Torah. It gives you tremendous chiyas, tremendous strength and energy that comes along with Torah. You can donate online at longestshir.com or by texting us 41444. The donations are coming in. We really appreciate it. The winner of the last hour, we haven't got the numbers in yet. The one who gave the highest amount is going to win a relic from Area 51. Win a relic from Area 51. This hour, somebody, this is a big one. I hope you're listening closely. Somebody has donated a Clayton Kershaw signed baseball. Yep. Clayton Kershaw signed baseball. If you want to go home with that baseball, you need to be the single highest donor this hour, and you'll take that home. Stick around, by the way, for the 17th and 18th hour. What I have to announce, we have to be able to give away for our biggest donors. You won't believe it. But again, you take this hour, the highest donation gets a signed Clayton Kershaw baseball. That shouldn't stop you for the smaller donations. Every dollar helps. They ultimately help us allow more children to be able to go farther with getting a Jewish education. And that's an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing, Baruch Hashem. Okay. I'm stalling purposely because this is a very difficult topic, so I'm now rambling. But we got to begin, so be it. We're not going to have the answer today of that eternal question of why bad things happen to good people. It's the oldest question that humanity has ever faced. The apparent injustice in the world. But we need to be able to develop an approach, at least a way to think about it. I want to thank my dear friend David Lunzer, just dropped off the book, David Mamet, The Wicked Son, Anti-Semitism, Self-Hatred, and the Jews. Anti-Semitism certainly fits into this shiur, this hour, and the Yerushalayim one, and of course the earlier one we had about why the Jews rejected the other messiahs, or supposed alleged messiahs. Now, natural evil. Let's talk about this. See, man-made evil, there's a difference. Man-made evil is evil perpetrated by human beings. Evil perpetrated by human beings. Hitler, Pol Pot. Those are easier to digest from a theological standpoint. Why? Because one could say that God did not build Auschwitz and its crematoria, men did. Man, not God, is responsible for the Holocaust. Judaism posits that people have freedom of choice, and only where there exists the possibility of evil does there exist the possibility of good. As Dennis Prager, I heard once put it, if these horrible acts argue against the existence of God, then the beautiful acts must argue for God's existence, right? If you're going to say that these man-made atrocities argue against the existence of God, then you have to be consistent and say that the beautiful acts argue then for God's existence. I think he got that from Rabbi Milton Steinberg. Now, Holocaust makes faith in God challenging, but what it actually does, it makes faith in man impossible. Faith in human beings or humanity. Humanity has had a bad track record. The question from the Holocaust really means when someone questions God because of the Holocaust, what it really means is, I cannot believe in God because of the Holocaust. What does that imply? The implication of that statement is that were it not for this, then you would have no problem. But the truth is the Holocaust presents no problem different than anything else in history. What is unique, why the faith wasn't challenged when thousands were killed at other periods in history? At what point what number does faith become untenable? What number does faith become untenable? That's the question. That's the challenge. Why isn't the 1648 pogroms of the Jewish people a challenge to your faith? It's not. No one ever says, well, look at 1648. Why doesn't it bother us that the Cambodian communists killed nearly 1/3 of Cambodians, 2 million people? Why isn't that a challenge to our emunah? So it seems that, in a sense, that questioning of God is because it's personal. It feels personal. And therefore, we have to acknowledge it comes from an emotional place, not necessarily a rational question. But again, man-made evil, I do believe, is easier to approach because God gave us a choice and humans have done some terrible things. We've known that since the beginning of Sefer Breshit, what man is capable, what kind of havoc man is capable of doing. Okay? Now, let's talk about something much more difficult, and that is to talk about natural evil. That is much harder to explain on a sophisticated level. What is natural evil? Natural evil is like a tsunami, an earthquake. See, the reason why that's theologically more difficult to explain is that because that is not shared, that is not generated by the choice of a human being. It's God's decision to bring the tsunami. It's God's decision to bring the earthquake. That's a much more difficult question to face. How do we approach natural evil when it happens in the world? So, the Christian approach is to reject it outright. What that means is, St. Augustine said that the devil or fallen angels, they're the ones that did it. The devil or the fallen angels, they're the ones that caused this. That's the Christian approach. That's not the Jewish approach. The Judaism does not believe in any being that is powerful outside that of God. It is God alone. So how can a Jew formulate some type of approach? I like to set it up in the following way. There are 4 fundamental forces of physics that operate in the universe. 1, strong nuclear force. That's what keeps protons from flying away and awry. 2, weak nuclear force. That's responsible for the phenomena within a nucleus. 3, gravity. That's the attraction between masses. 4, electromagnetic force. That's the interaction of various charged particles. Okay? Those are 4 basic, 4 fundamental elements of physics. Likewise, there are 4 fundamentals of God's world. There are more. There's Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikarim. There are many lists out there of the fundamental principles of the Jewish faith, but I would say there are 4 key Ikarim of the way God's world works. 1, the universe must allow for beings that can think or feel. It must allow for beings that could think or feel. 2, those beings must have the ability to make moral choices. 3, the universe must operate by laws that are generally reliable. And number 4, the universe at some point has to declare the power of God. Those I see as the 4 fundamentals of God's world. The universe must allow for the ability to humans to think and feel. 2, they must have the ability to allow humans to make moral choices. 3, the universe must operate by laws that are reliable. And number 4, the universe must declare the power of God. Must declare the power of God. With that in mind, I want to share with you 2 arguments. One made by Richard Swinburne, the other by John Hick. Who's Richard Swinburne? Richard Swinburne is a very important philosopher for believers, for Ma'aminim. He's the professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford. Professor of philosophy at the University of Oxford. He speaks a lot on the subject of the existence of God. He is one of the strongest proponents and advocates of faith-based religion. And probably the highest up the echelon of the academic totem pole that we have in the current moment. Professor of philosophy, the chair at the University of Oxford. So he says that natural evil, again, tsunami, earthquake, fire, well, fire is sometimes man-made. Natural evil is justified by the need for knowledge. They are logically necessary if agents are to have the knowledge how to bring about evil or to prevent its occurrence. Let's break that down. Man has to know how to wreak havoc in order to choose to be heroic and not to wreak that havoc. If you don't know the effects of a tremendous disaster, of what an earthquake is capable of doing, of what a tsunami is capable of doing, you don't know what the ability of evil you have within you for you to decide not to do that. I would say like this: if you've watched, if you've watched the ability of, even a superhero shows, they're always looking, the bad guy is always looking to generate something that could approximate what a natural disaster can do. Create a tidal wave that floods an entire city. Create some nuclear force that wipes out an entire civilization. All of the new Star Wars. Richard Swinburne says we need to know of that possibility. We need the knowledge of such things existing in order for us to know how bad we're capable of descending, in order to choose not to do that. In a sense, to choose to be heroic. That's what Swinburne argues. John Hick is a British philosopher and theologian, also a strong advocate for monotheism. He slightly twists this argument. He says they are necessary if human beings are to have a natural environment that allows them to choose to love God and choose to believe. That would demand a situation as if there was no God. It's a very difficult point. Let's clarify it. There's a difference between them. They're not saying the same thing at all. Swinburne is saying man needs to see the eye of evil. He needs to see the world at its completely worst, at its complete worst. A tsunami, a flood, an earthquake of epic proportions. So he sees the evil that can be done, and at that moment, he can choose not to do it. He can choose not to do it. John Hick also talks about choice, but from a different vantage point. Man has to have the ability to understand that there are certain circumstances which may force him not to believe in God, and yet still, he will believe in God. You understand? One is focusing on the choice of what the human being will do. He needs to know that he can do complete evil in order to really choose to do complete heroics. Hick is saying that's not what it's about. Hick is saying it's about you need to have the ability to reject God. You need to see something that's so dark that you could reject God in order for you to really choose and actually have a relationship with God. Meaning if nothing ever abnormal happens, if everything is just nice, peaceful, and harmonious, then what is the strength of your relationship and belief in God? It's not tested in any way. It's not called into question. You have no moment that can be as if there is no God. Okay, that's the position of John Hick. That's the position of John Hick. The approach that I think is the most traditionally Jewish approach, is the following. Again, we've had so far three. The Christian approach is that it's the devil's work. Jews don't believe in that. The second approach was that of Richard Swinburne, which is plausible. Richard Swinburne's argument that we do it so we could choose to be heroic. And there's John Hick's view is we do it so we could actually choose to love God, choose not to believe, or choose to believe. What I think is the most Masorah Dika approach, the most Jewish traditional approach, is the approach of the book of Iyov. The book of Iyov deals with the question of why do good people suffer? After 37 tense chapters of questioning and challenging, God gives us Job. God gives us Job's answer. God gives an answer to Job. Vayan, this is Perek Lamed Chet Pasuk Aleph. Vayan Hashem et Iyov min hasa'ara vayomer. Hashem answered Iyov out of the storm wind, and he said, Mi ze machshich eitze b'milan bli das. Who is this that darkness counsels by words without knowledge? Ezer na kegever chalatzecha, gird yourself. V'ashelcha v'hodiani, for I'm going to demand things of you, and let me know your answer. Eifo hayita b'yesarei haaretz. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Hageit im yadata bina. Let me know if you know the answer to that one. You know what he's saying? I won't say it. Let's keep reading. Pasuk Yud Bet. Hamiyamecha tzivisa boker yadati hashachar mekomo. Has you commanded the morning since the day began, and did you cause the day spring to know its place? Pasuk Lamed Beis. Hatotzi mizarot bi'ito va'ayish al baneh tenachem. Can you bring out the misarot, right? Can you bring the misarot in their season? Or can you guide the bear with his sons? Can you do all of these things? One more quoting, and then I'll put it together what he's saying. V'yan Hashem et Iyov, and God said to Iyov, saying, Harov im shadai yisor mochiach Eloka ya'anena. Shall a reprover contend with Hashem? He who gives musar to God, let him answer for himself. V'yan Iyov et Hashem yomer. Iyov answered God, saying, Hein kalosi ma shivecha. Right? I am vile. I'm nothing. What could I answer you? Yadi samti lamofi. Right? I put my hand on my mouth. God's answer is, God is God. Who are you to assume that you can understand everything? In a sense, if I knew him, I'd be him. If I knew him, I would be him. God's answer is God is God. Who are we to assume that we can understand everything? That's the traditional approach. To me, it's exceptionally logical. God is infinite. Can you answer the question how God created the world? You can't. So therefore, why do you assume that you can answer the question of divine fairness? You can't answer the question. If you knew God, you'd be God. There are some things you can't answer. That's the whole answer of the book of Iyov. If you knew God, you would be God. You cannot answer that. You cannot answer that. That's, I think, the most traditional Jewish answer to that question. Very heavy shiur so far. Very heavy. Very heavy shiur. We're talking about, right, just to review, we've been speaking about why bad things happen to good people. We first talked about man-made evil, Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, and we said that's a little easier to understand in Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology, because God gives humans free choice, and they could build the world, they could destroy it. We put aside man-made evil and dealt with the much more difficult question, the question of natural evil, natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis. How do you explain that in the light of Jewish tradition? We've given 4 answers. Number 1 is the Christian answer, that the devil did it. We don't hold of that. Richard Swinburne, the Oxford University head of philosophy, gave his answer, and we saw John Hick's answer, the British theologian. We gave his answer, and then we saw what I would say is the more traditional Eov answer. The whole book of Eov is saying, just like you don't know how the creation of the world works, why do you think you could figure out how good and evil work? You don't know. You don't know a single thing he told Eov. And Eov accepted it then. He says, I'll shut my mouth. I don't know a thing. That's what makes you God. If I knew him, I'd be him. If I knew him, I'd be him. Okay, those are some approaches to this question. None of them will be fully satisfactory. What the rabbis have offered up in place of these very difficult and unsatisfactory answers, I mean, I think the Eov is the most logical one. God is infinite, we're finite, and you're asking to understand everything, which you can't. It's what Moshe asked God, Hareini, show me your ways, God. Right? Show me the way you operate. You can't always get an answer to that. There are some emotional responses that come from the Hasidic literature. And those resonate with, those resonate differently for different people. The answer of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says, whoever notices ugliness in somebody else's behavior, you should know that even God is there too. Ki leis aser ponemine. There is no place devoid of God. You know, we learned this earlier. We did this at the Kabbalah slot, 5 a.m. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said that Nigash Moshe el ha'am Rafel. Moshe went right to the cloud. Why did Moshe go straight into the mist? All the people stood far away. Moshe went right into it. Why? Ki sham Hashem. Because God is even in there. Because God is in there. Even in the wall, even in the darkness, even in our darkest moments, if you push through, you'll find God there. This was a very Hasidic approach. That in the tragedy, mamish in the Auschwitz, mamish in the darkest moments, you reach out deep in there. You'll find in that darkness, God is with you. It's a playoff of a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu chapter 13, pasuk 17, Yud Gimel Yud Zayin. It says, "B'mistarim tifka nafshi," that God cries with us in the hiddenness, in the hidden chambers. God is with us. I've told you about the holy Eish Kodesh, the Rebbe of Piazetzna. The Rebbe of Piazetzna, of Klonimus Kalman Shapira, who is really the Rebbe of the Holocaust, so to speak. By the way, he's not the halachic Rebbe of the Holocaust. There's the Sefer Mimamakim, which is a whole sefer of halachic questions that came up during the Holocaust. Very, very heavy sefer. But the Eish Kodesh is the philosopher of the Holocaust. He dealt with it. He was losing family members one by one, and he kept writing his Eish Kodesh. And the Eish Kodesh talks a lot about, certainly by the end of his life, he talks about the joy, the last simcha he has, of knowing that the Shechina is with us in our suffering. The Shechina suffers with us as well. That's a variation of the Baal Shem Tov. The idea of you're not alone. The suffering is real. It's a part of humanity. It's a part of existence. It's a part and parcel of what it means to be alive. There will be tragedy. There will be dark moments. There will be suffering. You cannot delete them. You cannot avoid them. But to know that you don't walk alone, that you walk with God. That's the approach of Rav Klonimus Kalman Shapira of Piazetzna. A third emotional approach is that of the Rambam in Hilchos Tanis. The Rambam says in times of eis tzara, disaster and misfortune, we're asked to call out to God in prayer. God requests our prayers, and he wants us to come together as a people. There's something in that. Let's play that out for a moment. Natural disaster and disaster forces humanity to come together. Think about 9/11. Think about the idea of the unity, of coming together. There was an element of Jews standing together with each other, standing side by side, being there for each other. It doesn't rationalize the tragedy. God forbid. There's no price tag on that. But what it does do is ultimately understand what are we to gain from that tragedy. And that's the emotional response. We only found each other in the midst of those ashes. It's what was left after the fire was just each other. As Rabbi Akiva cried out, in Gemara Brachas 61b, Rabbi Akiva cried out as they were flaying his skin, now I understand V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, that sometimes you need this emotional response to the tragedy. It's not logical, and it's not logical for a person to be without their God. And it's the right approach is very difficult. So sometimes we need a logical approach. Sometimes we need an emotional approach. But I want to lay out a few caveats. Number one, Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik once wrote that rabbis, clergy, theologians do a great disservice by claiming to have the answers to all of life's questions. Rav Soloveitchik said the definition of religion is you're struggling with the Ribbono Shel Olam. That's the name Yisrael. Ki sarisa im Elokim is struggling with Hashem through some of these questions. You can't just open up a book like an Eshet Torah book and just get the answer to every question. Life doesn't always work like that. And you need to sometimes exist with these stiras, with these contradictions, and do the best you can. That's one caveat. The other main issue is that it's easier said and done, these responses, when none of us have gone through the level of tragedy of those who had suffered through the Holocaust, of those who have suffered through extreme trauma. And often some of these arguments come from philosophers in ivory tower, like I brought you from Richard Swinburne or Robert Hicks. These are arguments developed by people who didn't experience the pain trauma like the survivors did. And the survivors who moved on and built up Jewish communities don't engage in these types of in this type of analysis, and that may be the greatest hurdle. In the book by Albert Camus, who's a great, one of the greatest authors of all time, in his book *The Plague*, as everyone is dying out from this mass plague, there's a character there, Father Panelou, who's trying to hold on to his faith, and he says as follows. Thus he might have easily assured them that the child's suffering would be compensated for by an eternity of bliss awaiting them. How could he give that assurance when, to tell the truth, he knew nothing about it? Meaning, he hasn't experienced the consolation to be able to tell them with conviction about it. I mean, the first lesson that we are given as rabbis is we are told not to give some minimizing answer to anybody going through a tragedy. Answers such as they're in a better place or things like that. It's demeaning to the person who's going through suffering to share with them an eitzah of something that you haven't experienced yet. On the contrary, a good psychologist will advise the rabbi to be a voice for the pain that they're feeling right now, not the solution, not the solution to the pain, not the solution to the pain. Another challenge when dealing with this subject is that we all need a balance of logic and emotion. We all need a little bit of each. Rav Soloveitchik gave a classic paper that he delivered to the Symposium of Religion and Mental Health, 1961. And he pointed out the halacha is very concerned with logic and emotion. Both are necessary parts. You can't have one without the other. I'll give you an example, easy example. Shabbos. Shabbos has the concept of malacha, laws. I can't do this, I can't separate that from that. That's a very logical system. It's based on certain principles. But if that was all Shabbos was, it would be rendered almost meaningless. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what's called Kedusha Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos, the feeling we get when we light the Shabbos candles, when we go into Shabbos. Shabbos is a mix of logic and emotion. You need both. And I think the same thing is true when we talk about these kind of subjects, is that some of us have very emotional attachment to the subject. Some of us want a very logical approach. And I think the answer in Judaism is going to need something from both sides. This idea of logic and emotion you could see it throughout the Torah. For example, Moshe asks God for a sign so the Jewish people are going to know that it's him. He's the guy they're supposed to listen to. You know, by the way, Yosef said, I'm leaving a code for them. The code was pakod yifaked, that I'm going to redeem you. Yosef said, the man who says those things to you, know that he's the redeemer. But the people stopped believing in the code. They were so beaten down, they stopped believing in a messenger coming for them. So Moshe needed something strong for them. So God gives Moshe these two signs for the people. Sign number 1. Shmos Perak Dalid Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer hashlicheu arza. Throw your stick down to the ground. Right? Throw your stick down to the ground. Suddenly, it turns into a snake. God commands Moshe to grab its tail. Grab its tail. And suddenly, it becomes a staff in his hand. That's one sign. Hold that. Minimize it, bottom of the screen. The second sign is Habena yadcha bechekecha. Put your hand in your like by your bosom. Moshe did that, and his hand was leprous as snow. God then commands Moshe to put his hand back, and suddenly it becomes flesh once again. Why does he need two signs? Why does he need the sign of the snake turning into a staff, a hin and a hair? And why does he need the sign of the hand going into the chest and the hand coming out in the leprosy? Wasn't one enough? Kli Yakar gives the following answer. God told Moshe, hold the tail of the snake. Meaning, he was telling him that the Jewish people who are in this pitiful state of a tail will one day turn into a powerful stick. That wasn't logic. That was emotion. That was the Braveheart speech. Right? He was giving them, come on, you guys right now are schwach and limp. You're going to be strong. You're going to be strong like a stick. They needed to feel pride and believe in themselves once again. The leprosy taught them something very logical, that there must be consequences. You do something wrong, God punishes. God heals, and that's the cycle of life. These Egyptians wronged you. You went through some very bad stuff, and therefore, because of that, they will be punished. There will be retribution. That's logic. So the Kli Yakar was saying, everybody needs emotion and logic. That's the Ikar of Yadus. Judaism needs a Judaism that is built on logic. You understand it. There's halacha. It's mechanical. I could define it. I could explain it. And on the other hand, Judaism is expressed and developed and understood through an emotional experience. The Shabbos has the malachas, and the Shabbos has the Kedushas Shabbos, the Kedusha Shabbos. I want to go back to that issue of how do we address something that we never felt, that none of us in this room ever felt at that magnitude. See, that was Moshe's greatness. Moshe's greatness was, the pasuk says, Vayar besivlosam. He saw their pain. That's our job. Our job is to watch, not to critique, but to empathize. More than that, says the Shmos Rabbah, the Medrash, Mahu v'yar, what does it mean he saw? He says that Moshe was bocha, he was crying, and he said, my gosh, what is this? She'ein lecha malacha kasha kamalacha. They have such hard work, these people. He put himself in their shoes. The root of empathy. The root of empathy. That's an important element. Seeing someone's plight doesn't mean just looking nebuch what they're going through, but it's more than that. It's doing something about it. You want to ask me what the main Jewish response is when bad things happen to good people? I'll give you the number one Jewish response. The number one Jewish response of what we do when bad things happen to Jewish people, the Jewish response is, when bad things happen to good people, is what could I do for that person? Come on. Philosophy, we'll discuss later with the rabbi. Philosophy, we'll pontificate later over a cup of coffee. Right now, what does that person need? That's the Jewish response. That has always been the classic Jewish response. It's not the time. I'll ask questions at the Pesach Seder. We're going to have a long Seder. I'll get out all my questions. But right now, somebody needs me. I'm going to get up and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to do something about it. I saw a unique approach, something new that I hadn't seen in a while, that was developed by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zitzal, the great Rosh Yeshiva from Gush. He gave a talk after, I think it was after the tsunami, actually. The tsunami. And he said the following. He had the following mahalach. He was very angered that there were some rabbonim getting up saying that it was a punishment for this sin, for that sin. There's very few subjects that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was more angry by than hearing people pronouncing judgment of why certain bad things happened. So he says like this. In a talk I gave in the yeshiva in the day after the disaster, I emphasized to my Talmidim that we are the descendants of Avraham. Avraham saw fit to pray for a society, even though he knew it was corrupt to the core. It was mamish. Sodom was the epitome of evil, and Avram davened for them. So you could ask the kasha. Avram didn't daven for them. Avram davened for the tzaddikim. Says Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Avram didn't daven for the tzaddikim. Avram was davening, God, maybe there are some good people there who are enough for you to be able to save the rest of the city. He didn't say, maybe you could pull out some tzaddikim. Because think about the argument. Maybe there are 50. Maybe there are 40. Why was he changing the number? If it was about saving people, he could have just said, is there any tzaddikim we could pull out? He kept trying to find a number that was strong enough to save all the people of Sodom. No matter how pagan, no matter how big of the sinners they were, for Avraham, they were worth davening for. To survive or not to survive, that is up to God. But to care about another human being, that is not up to us. It's an obligation. We must, said Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. Think about Yonah davening about the great city of Nineveh, which was filled with sin. How can we not pray for countries that are suffering? As the Gemara and the Medrash, Gemara in Sanhedrin says, when the Egyptians were drowning, my seyadi tovim b'yam, my creations are drowning in the sea, and you want to start singing Shira? You want to make a whole song and dance? So Rav Aaron Lichtenstein says, not only obviously must we not sing, but how dare we go about our daily business either on the day after a tsunami? There is something about drowning in the sea, said Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, that is different than all other forms of death. Drowning is absolute loss, total annihilation. It's as though the person never existed. There's a violation of the order of creation, a departure from the natural course of the world. Could we possibly not have compassion for such a great number of people and offer our prayers on their behalf? For Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, it was a given. If the next morning after the tsunami, you are not getting up and crying and davening for all those that suffered, there is something flawed with you morally and religiously as a Jewish person. How could we not react with compassion? Now here is where he goes off. He goes nuts on those that rabbis that say that X and Y happened because of some sin. Some people concern themselves with the question of why it happened, voicing opinions on why the tragedy occurred, specifically in that place, in that time. These same people also explain why infants and young children die. Apparently, they consider themselves experts in the way of divine providence. And here, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein says it's strong. We have to distance ourselves completely from such shallow and false answers. These are questions for Chazal, who spoke in some general correlation. It's for them to deal with, not people like us. What's required of us is absolute humility. We must remember Chazal teaching about Bilam. The Gemara says this person who claimed to know God's mind, could he not understand his donkey's mind? That pretentiousness, that moral, philosophical, religious pretentiousness, to think you got it all figured out, you know why that person is suffering, we totally reject it. We totally reject it, says Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. As I said before, let's review. We've been a little bit all over the place in this year, but let's review our approach. We started the question of how to understand the role of God vis-a-vis evil in the world. I started by talking about man-made evil, evil created by human beings, right? The Stalins of the world and the like. And I presented an approach to man-made evil that ultimately God gives us choice. We can destroy the world or make the world. The harder question is the question of natural evil, natural disaster. We discussed the Christian approach, philosophical Swinburne and Hick approach, physics, laws of physics. We discussed that as well. I gave you the Eov, the classic Jewish approach to evil as comes from the book of Eov. We went through emotional responses, 3 of them, from the Baal Shem Tov, through the Eish Kodesh, through the Rambam. And then we talked about some pitfalls of engaging in a discussion like this. Some are moved by logic, some by emotion. Who are we to talk about it when we never felt it? And Rav Soloveitchik's issue is that sometimes these answers do a disservice. They are unfulfilling, and they make us feel that's all that religion has to offer. They take away the main part of religion, which is for the person to discover it themselves. After that, I shared with you Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's approach to natural disaster. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's approach is it's our job to get up and daven for whoever is suffering, Jewish or not Jewish, pagan or not pagan. We make no distinction, just as Avraham got up and davened for Sodom, just as Eov got up and davened for Nineveh. And the true Jewish approach is ultimately, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? I want to give you one more mahalach in this subject of tragedy and natural disaster. Torah tells us at the beginning of Lech Lecha. In my opinion, what I'm going to tell you now, I think, is one of the most important midrashim in all of the collection of midrashim. I think this one may be the most important. Vayomer Hashem el Avram. God says to Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go from your land, mimolatecha beit avicha, el haaretz asher areka, to the land which I will show you. It's a very abrupt conversation, very strange. Why is it very strange? We don't even know that God knows Avraham. There's no, hey, I'm God, how are you? We've never met before, but so-and-so. It just jumps right into it. God says to Avraham, Lech lecha, go. Where's the background? So whenever you have a gap in the Torah, there are lots of gaps in the Torah. Whenever you have a gap, that's where the Midrash fills in to give you what we missed, the backstory. So here is the Midrash. I'm going to not translate one word purposely. Avram looked around the world, Venire como bira, and it seemed like a palace that was doleket. It seemed like a palace that was doleket. Avram said, could there be such a place without an owner? At that moment, God came out of the sky and said, Lech lecha, go, my son. You and I will change the world. The Midrash says, Avram looked around the world, and it seemed like there was a palace that was doleket. Avram said, could there be a palace with such an owner? God came out of the sky and said, Lech lecha. What's this Midrash telling us? I think there's 2 ways to understand the word doleket here. The classic way to understand doleket is that Avram looked down the world and he looked like a palace that was doleket. It was lit up. A beautiful, well-lit palace. Avram said, could there be such a beautiful palace without an owner? At that moment, God comes out of the sky and says, Lech lecha, I am the owner. Come on, I want to show you this world. That's one way to read the Midrash. That's the classic way. I want to give you a different way to read this Midrash. Doleket doesn't mean lit up. You know what doleket means? It was on fire. Avram looked around the world and it seemed like a palace that was on fire, that was doleket. Avram said, Could there be a house that's on fire and there's no one watching it? There's no owner here? At that moment, God came out of the sky and said, Lech lecha, meaning, God came out of the sky and said, Avram, I built this house. It's on fire, but I've been waiting for a partner to join with me in fixing the world. That's how you read the Medrash. I think that way of reading the Medrash classically describes what our relationship is vis-a-vis Hashem. Hashem put a beautiful world out there. If I may quote, if you don't mind. I know a couple hours ago we had George Strait. It's time to quote some Queen for a moment. Here it is. And then lyrics. Is this the world we created? And then lyrics. This says it all. Just look at all those hungry mouths we have to feed. Take a look at all the suffering we breed. So many lonely faces scattered all around, searching for what they need. Is this the world we created? What did we do it for? Is this the world we invaded against the law? So here's the key part. You know that every day a helpless child is born who needs some loving care inside a happy home. Somewhere a wealthy man is sitting on his throne, waiting for life to go by. Is this the world that we created? We made it on our own. Is this the world we devastated right to the bone? There's a God in the sky looking down. What can he think of what we done to the world that he created? That, I think, is the Medrash of Dolekes. God created a bira, a palace, and we mamish set it on fire. And God is looking down. And Avram says, what is happening here? And God says, I was waiting for you. I was waiting for a partner in this world, and that's mamish what happened. And from then began the mission and the journey of the Jewish people. The mission and the journey of the Jewish people to begin to repair, to begin to fix the world, to begin to do something about this world that we're in. I think this also explains a very difficult concept for people, the concept of what it means to be a chosen nation. People get uncomfortable when they hear the phrase, the Jews are the chosen people. It makes them uncomfortable. You're not allowed to say that. It's a bad word almost to say the chosen people. I remember once when I was in a rabbi in New York, the mayor Mike Bloomberg spoke in the shul. And he said, I don't buy into this whole chosen nation thing. Well, it's not for him to buy or not buy. The Torah says, we're in Am Segula, a treasured nation, Am HaNivchar, the chosen nation. But we need a pshat, what that means to be a chosen nation. And I think we have a pshat based on this, what we just said, about the Dolekes and about Avraham and about the world on fire. I like to use an analogy, if I may, about a football field. Imagine God says to us, peace, harmony, all good things are waiting at the other end zone. If you just get there, you'll be able to live securely. You'll be able to live in the greatest life you ever could have imagined, with bounty, with happiness, with success, and all of that. You just got to get there. How do you get there? The best way to get there is to hold on to the map, the guide cube that will get you there. What's the guide cube that will get you there? Torah. If you're holding on to the Torah, you can get from point A to the end zone. Now in football, not everybody can hold on to the football. You need somebody to hold on to the football, run the ball, and everybody else is either blocking, moving the defense, making sure that there are spaces on the edges, blocking any of the invaders that may come in. That's how you understand chosen nation. Chosen nation does not mean that the Jews were greater than everybody else. It means they're the ones who are asked to run the ball. They're the ones who are asked to run the Torah. And we are not to work against humanity. We are asked to work with humanity. The other nations are supposed to be there with us to block for us, not to just protect the Jews for the greatest, but because to help allow the Jews to get that ball to the end zone so we can achieve and unlock all the brachos that God had promised at the end of time. I think an explanation like that allows for an understanding of chosen nation to appreciate chosenness without assuming anything exceptional or perfect or better than in the people that are holding the Torah. Their personalities are best suited to carry the Torah throughout the generations, to carry that flag post to the end, to get it to the other side, of the field. I think that's the idea of what it means. And that comes from this Medrash of Delekus. God was waiting for a partner in this world to fix the world. And that was Avraham. And that was a tradition he passed on to the Jewish people. The tradition of helping, of stepping up in times of disaster. You know, Jews are very good at stepping up in times of disaster when things are at their worst. But sometimes what it means to be an ish chesed, what it means to be a bal chesed, is are you there for people when they're not at their worst, but when they're When they're The big tragedies, the big events, people tend to step up in. But the question is, are we there for people in the day-to-day when it's not as heroic? That's the question of an ish chesed. That's the question of what it means to be kind, and it means to be good, and it means to be thoughtful of other people. It means to step up. And that's the basic answer to the question of suffering in the world. We may not have directly the answer to that question. For me, the answer of Eov is ultimately, I think, the best we'll do with a little smattering of the Baal Shem Tov, and you mix in there Richard Swinburne, as we said before, and a few others, and together, that's what you get. The theologian C.S. Lewis once said in his book, The Problem of Pain, that theodicy is an attempt to make the best of a difficulty for theism. Theism is belief in religion. Theodicy is attempt to explain tragedy. The strength of our case is not with theodicy. The strength of our case lies elsewhere. It's a great line. The strength of our case is not with some logical argument. The strength of our case lies in us as human beings being able to rise and doing good for others. That's how we make the argument. We make the argument by saying the Torah compels us, impels us to do better, to be better people, to be kinder people, to be more loving people. Ultimately, that's why you're tuned in, and that's why many of you are here. Some are there to listen to Torah, and you should keep hearing more Torah. Those that are watching at home, www.longestshir.com. We're going for the 18 hours. But it's about more than just hearing some Torah. It's about seeing Torah enacted, doing something to support Jewish education. You could do that either by donating live online, longestshir.com, or texting us at 41444. 41444, and at the same time texting the word Torah, and the instructions will kick right back to you. We got a full schedule still up ahead. Who knows who's got the schedule on them? Have you got the schedule? Oh, here we go. Can you pass it over to me? Thank you. Just to give you a sense of what's coming up, I think that was our heaviest shiur. We're done with that one. I guess we went from our most whimsical shiur beforehand about aliens, werewolves, and unicorns to our most difficult shiur, natural disaster. At 12 o'clock, we moved to the subject, Jacob's Ladder and the Stairway to Heaven. Does secular culture have a home in this religion? I'm going to talk about pop culture and its role within Judaism. Where does it fall in? What folder do Jews put it in? 1 p.m., I want to talk about different paradigm shifts, some new ideas that are out there in terms of education and raising children that I think fit well with the Torah's message to us. 2 p.m. is the subject, is there a Jewish tradition to Larry David, the people of the joke? I want to look at some of the classic Jewish jokes and what they say about Judaism and the Torah's message to us. We're going to do a mincha at 3 p.m., followed by a lecture about Shabbos. 4 p.m. is Fight Club, what it means when the rabbis in the Talmud argue. That raises the discussion of a machloket. What's a machloket all about? How could you have two opinions and both of them be right, both of them be Torah? And we close with the final topic, 5 p.m., Judaism Alive, Why Nothing Compares to Torah. Ultimately, what that is, that's going to be our big celebration. The middle school the kids have mastered 18,000 questions on the book of Breshit. And at 5 p.m., I have to make the argument, why Torah? Why couldn't we do 18 hours of hula hoop or whatever else to raise money for education? Why is Torah above all? Why is it Torah uber alles when it comes to Judaism? We're going to talk about that at 5 p.m., and hopefully we'll all be here to celebrate together. Those that are watching from outside of LA or from somewhere far, we'll be having you in mind when we celebrate our Siyum at 6 p.m. Until then, take a couple-minute break, 5 minutes. We'll see you again for the 12 o'clock shift for our next year. We thank you. Keep up the support. We're going to announce our next giveaway for the next hour momentarily. The biggest donor, you still have 2 more minutes, the biggest donor this hour is going to win a signed Clayton Kershaw baseball. We thank you for your support. See you soon.